The battlefield lay in silence, but it was not peaceful. Smoke and ash filled the sky, turning the sunlight into a dull gray haze. Broken machines and twisted metal littered the ground like the remains of a storm. The smell of burning oil and scorched metal was thick, almost choking. In the middle of it all, he saw her. She knelt among the wreckage, her armor battered and scorched. The alien princess. Even from a distance, he could see the proud curve of her posture, though it was cracked by exhaustion. One of her shoulders sagged slightly and the edges of her helmet were dented. She looked both majestic and fragile at the same time. For a moment he froze, unable to believe that someone so powerful could look so human in their pain. He had been trained to fight her kind, taught that humans were weak and aliens were superior. But that moment made him question everything he had learned. The battlefield was emptying. Soldiers ran past, some injured, some retreating, but he ignored them. All he could see was her, kneeling in the dirt, alone and exhausted. Cautiously, he stepped closer. Every crunch of debris under his boots echoed loudly in the quiet battlefield. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for her armor. He had no idea if she would attack him, or even recognize him as anything other than an enemy, but he couldn't leave her here to die. "You don't have to die like this," he whispered, his voice shaking despite his effort to stay calm. She did not answer. She seemed too proud, too stubborn, and maybe too tired. Slowly, he began to remove the heavy plates piece by piece, careful not to touch her in a way that would hurt her. Each piece of armor he removed revealed more than her body. Bruises, scratches, and tiny cuts showed the toll of battle. The realization hit him. This warrior, this princess who had fought so many enemies and commanded armies, was vulnerable now. She was human in ways no one expected, and something in him shifted. He couldn't just see her as a weapon anymore. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft clang of metal falling to the ground. He was careful, methodical, trying to respect her pride even while tending to her injuries, and then suddenly a soft voice came. "Why, are you helping me?" He froze. Her voice was weak, hesitant, almost fragile. It was nothing like the commands he expected from a princess or a warrior. There was no anger, no fearsome tone, just a soft, trembling question. "I couldn't let you die," he said, keeping his voice low. His heart pounded in his chest. "I can't just leave you here." For a moment she said nothing. Her green and gold eyes studied him carefully, filled with a mixture of suspicion, curiosity, and a hint of something he could not name. Her hand twitched slightly as if ready to push him away or strike, but she did nothing. He continued slowly, removing the next plates of armor, revealing the bruises that ran across her shoulders and arms. He tried not to stare too long, though he couldn't help noticing the small scars hidden under the metal, each one telling a story of battles fought and survived. "Why, a human?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was told you were weak, that you could not survive against us." "I am human," he said quietly, "but I'm not weak, and I don't care what your people think of me. I care about you right now. That's all that matters." Her eyes widened slightly, and for the first time he saw something different in them. A flicker of surprise, maybe even hope. She had never been treated this way before. No one had ever helped her without expecting something in return. And now here he was, risking himself just to make sure she lived. The smoke swirled around them, the battlefield fading into the background. It didn't matter who had won or lost. It didn't matter if they were enemies or allies. In that moment, all that mattered was the fragile connection forming between them. A human who refused to leave her behind, and a princess who had never known anyone could care so much. He adjusted a final piece of armor, careful not to press on the bruises, and looked into her eyes. "You're going to be okay," he said, hoping his words were true. For a moment she didn't reply. Then she whispered again, softer this time, almost to herself. "Maybe. I can survive this." And in that soft voice he heard something stronger than any weapon, the beginning of trust. The battlefield was quieter now, but the silence was heavy. Smoke still drifted lazily from the broken machines, and the distant sound of groaning metal reminded them both of the destruction around. Yet in the middle of all this ruin, there was a fragile moment forming. He continued to carefully remove the remaining pieces of her armor. Every clang of metal hitting the ground felt loud in the emptiness, like a heartbeat echoing in the vast silence. Her movements were small and hesitant, almost as if she was afraid he might hurt her accidentally. Her shoulders were tense, her hands clenching the dirt beneath her. Finally, he reached the last piece, the heavy chest plate that had protected her for countless battles. His hands paused. Underneath, her skin was marked with bruises and deep scratches, some fresh, some older. A thin layer of dirt and blood smeared across her collarbone. She flinched slightly when he brushed a hand near a sensitive spot, and he immediately pulled back, apologetic. I'm sorry, he whispered. I won't hurt you. Her head turned slightly and he caught a glimpse of her eyes, green and gold, shimmering with something raw and human. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She only watched him with a quiet intensity that made his chest tighten. There was so much pride in her gaze, and yet beneath it, a layer of exhaustion and vulnerability that few had ever seen. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke. Humans, why do you care? Her voice was soft, almost musical. It carried a mixture of curiosity, disbelief, and a vulnerability that caught him off guard. No one had ever asked her that question. No one had ever dared to care without expecting something in return. Because you shouldn't die here, he said honestly. Because I can help, because I can't leave you like this. She hesitated, blinking as if trying to process his words. Why would you risk yourself for me? He swallowed. Because I don't see you as an enemy. I see you as someone who deserves to live. That's all. Her hand twitched again, but this time not in defense. Instead, it rested lightly against the dirt as though she was weighing his words, deciding if she could trust them. He noticed how fragile she looked, the slightest movement revealing both her strength and the cracks in her armor. You're not afraid? She asked, her voice still soft. A little, he admitted, his lips twitching in a small, nervous smile. But fear doesn't stop me. Not when it's you. Her eyes widened and a faint blush brushed her cheeks, green-gold skin glowing under the smoke-filled sunlight. She had faced countless battles, led armies, and commanded respect across galaxies. Yet here she was, moved by something so simple. Human care. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax slightly. The tension in her shoulders eased, her breathing became less sharp. He continued cleaning her wounds carefully, dabbing away dirt and blood. Every touch was deliberate, respectful, and slow, showing her that he meant no harm. Finally, she spoke again, quieter this time. I've never had anyone do this for me. Not ever. He looked at her, meeting her gaze steadily. Then let me. I want to. Tears welled up in her eyes and she looked down ashamed. I'm supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to fight. I cannot depend on anyone. Even the strongest need help, he said gently. Even the fiercest warriors deserve care. You are not weak for letting me help you. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting his again. In them he saw fear, pride, pain, and something else, hope. It was a fragile hope, delicate and trembling, but it was there. For the first time in her life, she let herself believe that someone could care for her without expecting power, loyalty, or fear in return. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the battlefield in orange and purple hues. For a moment it was just the two of them, sitting among the wreckage of war, connected by trust and an unspoken understanding. Maybe, she whispered softly, almost to herself, maybe I can survive this. And in that fragile moment, he realized that survival was not just about strength or skill. It was about connection, care, and the courage to trust someone when everything else had failed. Night had fallen, and the battlefield now lay under a veil of darkness. The smoke and fire had dimmed to faint glows, and the distant sounds of crumbling machinery made the silence even more intense. He helped her stand, supporting her weight carefully. Every movement was cautious, as if one wrong step could undo all the fragile trust they had built. Her eyes darted nervously to the horizon, scanning the darkness. Even after he had helped her, she still carried the burden of fear. If they see me alive, if my people see you with me, she said softly, her voice almost trembling, they'll kill you. They will see you as a traitor. He shook his head firmly. Let them try. I don't care. Her gaze widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. No one had ever said that to her, not even her closest advisors. Her people were warriors who valued loyalty above life itself, and betrayal was punished with death. And here was a human, an enemy, willing to risk everything for her. You really mean that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, he said, looking directly into her eyes. I mean it. I'll protect you. I'll protect the trust you've given me, And I won't let anyone, alien or human, take that away. Her breathing slowed slightly, but the fear didn't vanish completely. She had been trained her entire life to fight, to survive alone, to trust no one. But now she felt something unfamiliar, the warmth of care, the possibility that someone could stand beside her without expecting her to fight for them. As they moved through the rubble, he noticed the tremble in her hands, the slight hesitation in her steps. Every scar, every bruise, every minor injury told a story of battles fought and losses endured. Yet despite it all, she was still strong. She was still regal, still proud. But underneath, there was a fragile human beating with exhaustion, hope, and fear intertwined. You're not afraid of me?" she asked again, this time a little firmer. "Not even knowing who I am, what I am?" "A little," he admitted with a small, wry smile. "But that doesn't matter. Not right now. What matters is that you live." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She had been taught to hide her emotions, to show nothing but strength. But as they walked, she let her walls slip just a little. Her voice softened. "I thought humans were fragile, easily broken, weak. And some are," he said honestly. "But some fight when everything is against them. Some are capable of things even they don't believe. I am human, and right now, I am here for you." Her eyes shone with something between surprise and awe. She had never heard these words meant so purely. In her world, humans were tools, enemies, pawns, not companions, not protectors. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean on him, even if just a little. She didn't know if she could fully trust him yet, but she could feel the sincerity in his movements, his words, his care. That tiny flicker of trust, fragile as it was, felt like warmth in the cold darkness surrounding them. The night stretched on, and they finally found a small ruined structure to hide in. He helped her inside, setting her down carefully. She stayed, still quiet, but her shoulders relaxed slightly as she leaned against the cold wall. Humans are nothing like I imagined," she admitted softly, almost to herself. "You care, even when you shouldn't have to. And you," he said, his voice gentle, "are nothing like the monsters I was told you were." A faint smile touched her lips, barely noticeable, but it was there. A smile of relief, of recognition, of hope. In that fragile moment, the war, the battle, the fear, they all faded. For the first time, they were not enemies. They were two beings, wounded but surviving, finding connection in the middle of chaos. One with the courage to care and one with the courage to trust, even just a little. The darkness surrounded them, but within it, something stronger began to grow. The beginning of trust. And maybe, just maybe, the possibility of something more. The night was thick and silent, the distant sounds of the battlefield fading into memory. He sat beside her, keeping a careful watch, while she rested against the wall of the ruined structure. Her breathing was shallow at first, tense with the remnants of fear. But slowly, under his calm presence, it began to even out. He looked at her carefully, noticing every detail, the bruises along her arms, the scratches on her face, the faint scars that spoke of battles she had survived alone. She was a warrior, yes, but she was also someone who had carried pain in silence, who had never allowed herself to lean on anyone. Until now, "I've never let anyone help me like this," she admitted softly. Her voice was low, almost fragile. "Not even my advisors, not even my soldiers. You can let me," he said quietly. "You don't have to face everything alone. Not anymore." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to him, searching for something she had never believed could exist. Sincerity. Why do you care?" she whispered. "You don't even know me. You shouldn't care." "I do," he said firmly. "And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all that matters right now." Her gaze softened, just a fraction. She had lived her life surrounded by duty, rules, and expectations, never questioning who would stand with her simply because they wanted to. And yet here he was, a human, offering her something she hadn't realized she needed: trust without conditions. They shared the quiet for a while, the only sounds the distant winds and their own breathing. Then, she asked something that had clearly weighed on her for a long time. Humans, why do you fight for each other, even when it's impossible? He paused, thinking carefully. Because we care. Because some of us refuse to give up, even when the odds are against us. Because we believe life is worth protecting, no matter how fragile it seems. Her eyes glistened in the dim light. I've never heard anyone say that before. I've never had anyone fight for me. Because of care, not duty. You can now, he said softly. I will fight for you, as long as I am able. And not because I have to, but because I choose to. For a moment, the weight of her pride and fear collided with the fragile trust forming in her heart. She had been a warrior, a leader, a symbol of strength. She had relied on herself and no one else. But now she realized that strength could also be in letting someone stand beside her, in allowing herself to be vulnerable. Maybe I can trust you, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Not fully, but enough. He smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and warmth flooding him. That's all I ask. That's all I need. They sat together in silence, each aware of the dangers lurking outside but finding comfort in the presence of the other. Slowly, she leaned slightly closer, not out of weakness but as a gesture of acceptance. She was still a warrior, but she had allowed herself to lean on him if only a little. Hours passed and the stars began to peek through the smoke-stained sky. He kept watch while she rested, but he felt a shift in her, a quiet courage, a willingness to accept care, to trust someone in a world that had taught her to trust no one. You're different, she whispered softly, almost to herself. You're not like anyone I've known. And you're different too, he said, softly smiling. Not like the stories, not like the fear, real and brave and strong. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was not a smile of arrogance or command, but a smile of connection, fragile yet real. In that smile he saw hope, trust, and the first steps of something neither of them could fully name yet. For the first time since the battle began, she allowed herself to rest, not just her body but her heart. And he realized that this fragile trust, once formed, could become a bond stronger than any weapon, stronger than any war. In the quiet of the night among the ruins of destruction, trust had begun. The first light of dawn barely touched the battlefield, casting long shadows over the ruined machines and broken earth. The air was cold, carrying the faint metallic scent of blood and smoke. He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she wobbled slightly. Every step reminded him of how fragile she was, even though she had survived countless battles. We don't have much time, he said quietly, glancing toward the horizon where faint movements hinted at the enemy regrouping. The ruins were not safe, and they could not stay here. She nodded, her voice soft but determined. Then take me somewhere safe. Anywhere. He wrapped an arm around her, careful not to touch her wounds too roughly, and began guiding her through the debris. She clung to him, not out of weakness, but out of trust, and that trust weighed heavily on him. He could not fail her. As they moved, she spoke again, her voice low and edged with fear. If they find me alive, my people will see you as a traitor. They will hunt you. You know that, don't you? I know, he said firmly. And I'm willing to take that risk. You are worth it. Her eyes shimmered with something he could not name, gratitude, awe, and something like relief. She had lived her life surrounded by power and fear, but never by care without expectation. And now, here was a human, risking everything for her survival. For a while they moved in silence, slipping between the shadows of ruined buildings and collapsed vehicles. Every noise made her flinch. Every distant footstep or clank of metal reminded her of the dangers that still lurked. He kept her close, shielding her with his body whenever possible, silently promising her protection without speaking it aloud. Finally, they found a partially collapsed shelter. He helped her inside, setting her down gently. She sank onto the floor, exhausted, her breathing heavy but steady. He knelt beside her, checking her injuries again. "You need rest," he said softly. "Even warriors need it." She looked at him, her green and gold eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and trust. I've never let anyone see me like this," she admitted. Her voice was almost a whisper, fragile yet full of courage. "Not like this. Human, alive, caring. I don't know if I can ever repay it." "You don't need to," he said. "All I ask is that you survive. That's enough for me." Her hand brushed his, a tentative, fleeting touch. He felt the warmth of her skin and the tremor in her fingers. She was a princess, a warrior, yet she had let herself rely on him. That was something she had never done before, and it moved him more than words could say. Outside, the faint sound of movement reminded them that danger had not vanished. The enemy could return at any moment. She looked at him, eyes wide. You really would risk everything for me?" "Yes," he said quietly, meeting her gaze steadily. "Because no one deserves to die alone. And because I care about you." Her lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling with emotion. She had faced countless foes, commanded armies, and survived wars. But now, in the quiet of this ruined shelter, she felt something stronger than fear. Trust. Something she had never experienced before. Something fragile and new. I've never known this," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I've never known someone could care like this." He reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. "You won't be alone as long as I'm here." Her breath caught, and for a moment she allowed herself to lean closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. The moment was delicate, yet it carried a weight neither of them had expected. A bond forged not in battle, but in care, trust, and shared survival. Outside, the sounds of the world returned, the hum of distant machines, the crackle of fire, but inside that fragile shelter, the human and the alien princess found something that war had never given either of them: safety, connection, and the possibility of hope. And in that hope, she began to believe she might survive not just the battle, but the loneliness and fear that had followed her all her life. The first rays of sunlight pierced the ruins, cutting through the smoke and dust that lingered over the battlefield. The world outside was still dangerous, still alive with the threat of returning enemies, but inside their hidden shelter, a fragile peace hung between them. He knelt beside her, carefully checking the worst of her injuries, though most of her wounds were already stabilized. She sat quietly, leaning slightly on him, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths that slowly grew steadier. For a long moment, they just existed in that quiet. The sounds of distant machinery and fire outside like background music to a fragile bond. She studied him with a mixture of awe and disbelief, the green and gold eyes that had commanded legions now soft with vulnerability. I've never let anyone see me like this," she whispered. Her voice trembled, almost afraid to show how fragile she felt. "Not even my closest advisors, not even my soldiers." "You can let me," he said gently. "You don't have to face everything alone anymore. You've fought alone for so long, but not this time." She shook her head slowly, as if the idea was both frightening and strange. "I'm not used to this. I don't know how to trust anyone, and yet—" Her fingers brushed his arm lightly, a hesitant gesture that carried more weight than words. "Well, yet I feel like I can trust you." He smiled softly, his heart catching in his chest. "That's all I need. Just enough to keep you safe." Her lips pressed together and she took a shaky breath. She had been trained to be unbreakable, to hide every doubt, every fear. Yet here, leaning against him, she realized that being strong didn't mean facing everything alone. Strength could also mean letting someone care for you, letting someone share your burden even for a moment. The silence stretched, comfortable yet charged with unspoken emotions. And then, From somewhere beyond the ruins, a sound broke through, the low hum of approaching machinery. Both of them tensed immediately. The enemy was near. She rose carefully, eyes wide but determined. "We have to move. They can't find us here." He helped her stand, steadying her with a firm grip. "I won't let them hurt you," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Not ever." For the first time, she didn't flinch. She looked at him fully, her trust shining through the fear. I believe you," she said softly. And he felt the weight of those words like a promise heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. They moved quickly through the ruins, ducking behind broken walls and slipping between shadows. Every noise made her flinch slightly, but she stayed close to him, trusting him to protect her. And he did. Every step, every glance, every movement was careful, deliberate, filled with the silent vow to keep her alive. Finally, they reached a small ridge that overlooked the battlefield. Below, the enemy was regrouping, but they hadn't noticed the two survivors yet. She sank to the ground, exhausted, but her eyes found his. I never thought I'd survive this war," she admitted, her voice soft and full of awe. "You will," he said quietly, kneeling beside her, "not just because you are strong, but because you let yourself trust. That's what makes you unstoppable." Tears glimmered in her eyes. She had faced armies, aliens, and betrayal, but never someone who cared so purely, so fiercely. And now she realized that survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about connection, trust, and hope. She reached for his hand, a fragile gesture that carried centuries of loneliness and the weight of a lifetime of battles. He took it gently, holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. For a moment, the world fell away. The smoke, the ruins, the danger, it all disappeared. There was only the quiet understanding between them, a bond forged not through war but through trust, care, and the courage to be vulnerable. And in that fragile, perfect moment, she understood something she had never known before. Strength was not in fighting alone, but in allowing someone to fight with you. The sun rose slowly over the battlefield, casting a soft golden light across the broken land. Smoke curled upward from scattered fires, and the distant groans of machines reminded them that the war was not over. But for the first time, neither of them focused on the destruction. They were alive together, and for now that was enough. She sat on a small ridge, her green and gold eyes reflecting the dawn. The wounds on her body were fading, and more importantly, the fear that had weighed on her heart for so long seemed lighter. He sat beside her, tired but alert, ready for anything, yet calm in the knowledge that she had survived another night. "I never imagined humans could be like you," she whispered softly, her voice carrying awe and gratitude. "Not weak, not selfish, but strong and brave and kind." He smiled faintly, brushing a lock of her hair from her face. "And I never imagined aliens could be like you. Strong, yes. Fierce, yes, but also human." Her lips curved into a small, fragile smile, one that held centuries of pain, battles, and loneliness. It was not the proud, commanding smile of a ruler, but the soft, honest smile of someone who had found a reason to trust. They watched the horizon together, quiet, as the world slowly woke around them. She leaned slightly against him, not because she was weak, but because she wanted to. For the first time, she allowed herself to rest, not just her body, but her heart. "Do you really think we can survive this?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I do," he said firmly, meeting her gaze. "Because we're not just fighting with weapons. We're fighting with trust, with hope, with the courage to care, and that makes us unstoppable." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she did not look away. "I've never had anyone care for me like this. Not like this, without expecting anything in return." "Then let me," he said simply. "Let me stand with you, protect you, and fight for you. You don't have to face the world alone anymore." For a long moment, they simply sat together, the silence filled with understanding. She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his, a gesture that spoke louder than words ever could. It was a fragile bond, but unbreakable in its honesty. The battlefield below was quieting, and distant figures could be seen moving cautiously. The war was not yet over, but they no longer felt helpless. Together they were a force neither could have faced alone. Not armies, not weapons, not even fear could stand against the courage they had found in each other. "I will follow you," she said softly, her voice steady now, "even if it means walking into the unknown." "And I will walk with you," he replied, Through anything. Through fire, through fear, through everything the universe throws at us. She smiled again, this time stronger, fuller. A smile that carried hope and the promise of a new life. She no longer felt like a lone warrior or a distant princess. She was alive. She was human in ways she had never known, and she was not alone. They rose together, hands still entwined, looking toward the horizon. The smoke and ruins were behind them, but the future stretched ahead, uncertain and vast. And yet in that moment they did not fear it, because they had each other. They had trust, courage, and the unshakable bond that comes from surviving together, from caring without expectation, from believing in hope when all else seems lost. The sun climbed higher, lighting their path, and for the first time in a long time, the alien princess smiled without fear. She was not just a survivor. She was more. She was a being who had learned the power of trust, the strength of connection, and the limitless potential of humanity. And he, the human who had refused to leave her behind, felt something that no battle or victory could ever give him. The quiet, powerful satisfaction of having saved someone not for duty, not for glory, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Together, they stepped forward, leaving the battlefield behind, ready to face the unknown. Two beings, once enemies, now allies, now friends, and maybe, just maybe, something more. And in that moment, the universe seemed smaller, kinder, and filled with endless possibilities. The end.